I feel like book burning or book banning is one of the quintessential, oh my God, that's a fascism happening kind of things in the Western American sort of zeitgeist. We think of, Fahrenheit 451, book burnings. We think of that famous picture from the Nazis where they're burning some books. That was books about queer and trans people, by the way. It's like, oh man, it's the most obvious sign for a liberal. Oh, tell a liberal that someone's destroying, banning, or burning books. They're going to be like, oh my God. It's what they do. um, so I guess for those people, this should be a little bit of a shakeup because new things are happening. Where there's books like being banned in places nowadays where they're like, okay, we can't talk about gender. We can't talk about transness. We can't talk about queer people. Just increasingly more books on that topic that are like, some of them I would understand. Okay, like Lolita by Nabokov, I completely understand why that's on a banned books list. Don't know if children need to be reading Nabokov, like Lolita in particular. But there's other books that are just sort of normalizing trans and queer people. And this is what folks don't get about the Don't Say Gay bills and stuff. They go, oh, well, why do you need to be educating kids about sexual preferences? Hey, real quick, hit the like button if you're enjoying the content. Hit the subscribe button as well and turn on all notifications. And also take a moment to check out the links in the description for merchandise and Patreon, where you can find exclusive free content. When you're in elementary, middle school, they do touch on some stuff like a little bit of racism. We want to discuss differences. Oh, we want to embrace differences no matter what the color of your skin. Like, we're getting used to this refrain now of, no matter the color of your skin or who you love. Like, the phrase, no matter who you love, is like something that you cannot say in a school anymore in these places where these laws have passed. When we do education normalizing groups of people, this is making it so that you can't normalize those groups of people. It's not talking about the particular ins and outs of gay sex or sexual preferences, although those should be included for high schoolers. Lack of queer aware sex ed leads to a lot of dangerous behaviors and like gay kids just kind of having to figure it out. And it's not good. So, but just leaving that aside, the reason why the Don't Say Gay is deeply inappropriate, no matter like, especially for especially young kids, is not just like we're doing sex education. No, it's about this family has two daddies. This family has two mommies. Isn't that lovely and normal? Like, you literally cannot acknowledge the existence of those people without being caught up in this. How does a teacher respond if like, it's like, today we're drawing our families, draw your mommies and daddies and grandparents and everybody, your brothers and sisters, draw all of them on a piece of paper. If a kid has two mommies or two daddies, are they even allowed to post the picture? Like, is that to some degree like an endorsement, or the teacher literally just cannot speak or acknowledge that they have two moms in front of the other kids? Like, where is the line? It's unclear. And so because the rules aren't clear, it just effectively shuts out all conversation on the subject. And so when we're talking about enforcement, like, how do we enforce this? If we're banning books, if we are, limiting the free speech of teachers by saying you can't teach this, you can't talk about this, how do we actually grapple with that? What we've seen previously is usually the school will fire the teacher if the teacher is gay and they're talking about it or something. Like, they just fire the teacher to avoid liability. It's just the thing that the school is going to do. But some of this, I guess, is necessarily going to require police to be involved, such as this situation where a plainclothes police officer entered a classroom in order to hunt down an allegedly, like a banned book that was allegedly in the classroom. Yeah, we don't talk about Emily's parents. We don't talk about them. So I think the book in question is called Genderqueer. It's a memoir by Maya Kobabe. Right, a plainclothes officer, from the kid's perspective and the teacher's perspective, just some fucking guy comes in and starts searching the place. I don't know. I haven't read the details of the case yet. I'm looking into it now. Mom and her roommate are here to pick up Emily. And I think that this was in Massachusetts. Yeah, this was in Massachusetts at a middle school, which is, for anybody who's not from the US, that's like ages like roughly 11 or 12 to like 14, maybe at the oldest, like 13, 14. That's the age range. So like a bunch of 12-year-olds in Massachusetts, which is supposed to be a fairly liberal place. It's supposed to be a democratic place. The ACLU is going to take action on this, of course. This happened at W.E.B. Du Bois Regional Middle School. So I guess the officer, he was plainclothed, but he was wearing a body cam. So the incident was recorded, and there have been even more questions have arisen after that, apparently. Of course, the ACLU has requested the body cam footage. Okay, so here's what happened. There was an anonymous complaint which led Great Barrington Police to open a probe about whether certain parts of the book Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe could be considered obscene material or pornographic. So police then notified the Berkshire District Attorney's Office as per the department's policy. They notified school and district administrators that they were coming to the classroom, and the officer was escorted there by the principal. The teacher, who kept the book in her resource library, was surprised to see the officer. The officer announced he was turning on his body camera and then looked for the book and did not find it. So in Massachusetts, they have rules against obscene material and pornography being in schools. And something about this memoir, Genderqueer, is allegedly falling under that purview. Like, that's what they're alleging. So a plainclothes police officer is then escorted to the classroom by the principal, and then he searches the classroom and does not find the book. Like, what? Sir, what is the point? What are you doing? Like, is that usually the order of operations here? Is there usually like a police officer who shows up? Is that the kind of crime that it is? Or is this the kind of thing where usually, you might have a parent like sues the school or something? Like, what, are you going to arrest the teacher? Was that the goal? Was that the goal of this? To arrest the teacher for having a book called Genderqueer? Of course, we would all like to see the recording. We would all like to see it. I don't think it's going to catch him, like, entering the classroom, but it's going to catch him, like, searching. Where did he search? Did he look in all the kids' backpacks? Like, it's softcore terrorism. It's a little bit of, it's like weaponizing a completely unrelated mechanism. Like, something that's not supposed to have anything to do with trans people specifically. It's like, okay, just generally obscenity. Like, I don't know. I've never read the book Genderqueer. I don't know if there's something horrible in it. And also, like, I do think that there is a conversation to be had about depictions of intimacy. And, like, there's a line, I guess, somewhere between this isn't a medical textbook and we're teaching you the mechanics of, like, how human reproduction works, which obviously, like, involves putting things in things, versus, like, this is intended to elicit arousal, Like, I feel like there's a line somewhere in there, and it's just up to the discretion of judges now to decide this. Like, they say it's up to parents and stuff, but then they restrict the material from the schools. So it's like, okay, now I have to educate my children about these things because the school refuses to do it. Like, it's also something that gives them an excuse to search anyone and everyone they decide to on a whim on the chance of banned books. Basically, maybe someone had it in for the teacher. Maybe the teacher is gay, and so some parent is maybe trying to retaliate. Genderqueer has no serious SA or illicit arousal. It has a very few tame PG-13 depictions of sex scenes. Right. So, unpopular opinion, probably. I don't think that, teenagers should be shielded from all depictions of intimacy. Like, I think it's okay for teenagers to be, like, reading and writing fan fiction, for example. It's not like they suddenly become sexual beings the day they turn 18. And denying the fact that they are horny little bastards is only going to cause them to hide things from you. It's only going to cause them to do things in an unsafe manner. You have to, on some level, accept that teenagers are horny and, like, provide them with a healthy outlet for that so that they don't go out and have unprotected sex and, like, get sexually assaulted or commit a sexual assault because they don't understand consent. Like, you don't want them to be vulnerable. And so it's, like, uncomfortable. Nobody wants to acknowledge that teenagers are horny because it's uncomfortable. We think of them as children. And, like, yes, in retrospect, I'm like, I can't believe I lost my virginity when I was 14. That's crazy. But like when I was 14, that's what I wanted to do. So there's like, you have to work with what you have and not pretend like you live in a fantasy world where you can shield children. Like if you shield children from the idea of sex completely, if you somehow manage to do that, they are still going to be horny and they will try to have sex anyway because they don't need to be taught how to do it in order to do things that can result in pregnancy or STIs or get like, yeah, lack of sex education results in higher rates of like child abuse because then the kids can't talk about what's happening to them. It results in teen pregnancies, higher rates of teen pregnancy and STIs. It's just, there's nothing about it that is actually results based a good idea. And I think frankly some of that does include education about the emotional aspects of sex. Like being able to read stories that can depict making out or other kinds of intimacy in a way that's like part of a narrative about like a teenager having to learn to make better choices, like that's not a bad thing. Yeah. And as always, it's fun to bring up during this discussion that child marriage laws tend to be pretty permissive in the states that also only have abstinence only education. I haven't really looked into that specifically, that access, but it would be super true. Like, it wouldn't surprise me. Through the puritanical eyes of Christian conservatives, they see the words gender, queer, and teen at the same time, and they go, "Ree!" That's true. They do freak out pretty hard about it. The school committee has since apologized. They were like, oh, we kind of didn't know what to do. This was an unprecedented police investigation. In hindsight, we should have approached the moment differently. The committee is apparently, it's going to work to collect feedback on how it could do better. It's going to host a community meeting. So the school district is like, okay, well, how should we handle this in the future? But I don't know. Obviously, there's not going to be any punishment for the officer. And this is just established that they're going to be able to do this kind of thing in the future. Like, there's not going to be any change that's going to materially prevent this from happening in the future, I don't think. Maybe is the school district going to petition the local government to be like, hey, don't fucking send police officers into our schools unless we call you. Like, we'll call you if we need you. Apparently, the governor expressed disapproval of the incident and of book banning in general. Okay, well, there's that. So yeah, this article includes a little blurb about genderqueer. It's a coming-of-age memoir about reckoning with confusion about gender. It does contain sexually explicit illustrations and language. It is this that many in the queer community say they believe is the reason for the censorship, not so-called obscenity. In Massachusetts, the test for obscenity is if the material is of interest sexually, depicts or describes sexual conduct, quote, in a way that is patently offensive to an average citizen of this county, and, quote, has no serious value of a literary, artistic, political, or scientific kind, according to the state. So yeah, they're just arguing that it's obscene, probably because, in a way that is patently offensive to an average citizen of this county. Well, all you need is an average of homophobic citizens, and then this book is illegal under obscenity. I really don't like this whole, if your average sensible person thinks that this is offensive, then it's offensive. Like, God damn it. For sexual minorities and gender minorities, it is just giving bigotry the power in that regard. Like, it's not in every place across the country that a majority of people are like homophobic or transphobic, but there are places where that is the case. And in those places, it's like, okay, well, your existence is obscene. Yeah, it's cancel culture when we do it. Mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, Mama makes a good point. This book is the one in particular that has been being brought up a lot during these conversations, but the problem isn't that there's any one book that this is happening to. And like, I wonder if it's, getting caught up in an obfuscation to even try to entertain whether genderqueer specifically itself should be in schools or not. Because the problem is that they're going after like all of this queer material. So it's like almost like it's giving them validity in a way to say, oh, well, let's have a conversation about what depictions of intimacy or sexual conduct are appropriate for teenagers. And it's like, yeah, that is a valuable conversation to have with other reasonable people, but this isn't a reasonable conversation. These people are just trying to censor gay people out of schools. Yeah, and the this ACLU employee says, "We're very troubled by this notion. They say anytime someone could call, they have an obligation. They say anytime someone could call, they have an obligation to go marching into places wearing a body cam and, interrogating people." Yeah, that's the thing. This is intimidation. It's the idea that if you have a book that could be borderline obscene or whatever, if you have a book that could be borderline inappropriate based on queer content, then the threat of being arrested or even just being intimidated by the police, because I mean, that's what they're doing. They're intimidating you into making you stop doing the thing that they don't like. Whether your specific book is legal or not, they're showing up to intimidate you. Yeah, they just want to exercise control. They just want to go, look, I can show up and harass you. I can show up and interrupt your day. I can show up and scare the children. These same people probably read their dad's Playboys as kids and see no issue with that. Again, because it's not about sexual content. It's about queer content. It doesn't matter the sexual content aspect. They will lie and say that they care about kids not seeing sexual content. But then, yeah, plenty of us were being exposed to straight sex scenes in TV. Plenty of us were exposed to weird sex shit when we were younger, or got into our dad's Playboys, or got on the internet and were seeking out porn, or we were writing our own fan fiction that was pornographic in nature. Like, it's not that these people care about not exposing children to sexual content. Again, a lot of these people also support parents having the right to sign off on their kid getting married at age 15. And then the kid doesn't have any right to get divorced. That's the other thing. You have the right to get married with parental consent in these states at the age of like 15 or 16, but you don't have the right to divorce until you turn 18. The thing that gets me is genderqueer is for young adults, not little kids. I mean, they're in a middle school. This is a school with like 12 and 13-year-old kids. And that is an age where you probably want to start like more like relationship and sex education, because that's the age. Like I said, I was 14 when I lost my virginity, and I was doing other sexual things before that. So, interesting. Yeah, so the state and federal constitutions on this issue protect the rights of students to receive information. I wonder if there's going to be, are we going to be able to take legal action on that? I think that might be the manner in which the ACLU gets involved here. If students have a right to receive information, then I guess we're going to have to do a competing rights conversation where it's like, oh, the rights of the parents to make educational decisions for their children versus the right of the student to receive information. It's just going to become a question of, do students have the right to know about gay and trans people and learn about queer relationships? Or do parents have the right to revoke that knowledge from their children, And yeah, so these bans could, quote, constitute unlawful discrimination, according to the ACLU. Conservative parents have a control kink. True. The letter says that the courts have, quote, recognized that the fact that some parents do not want their children to read certain books cannot justify depriving other students of their rights of access. So, maybe a parent could say, I don't want my kid to read such and such book, but they can't restrict the rights of other kids to have access to that information. If we lived in a sane society, the rights of students to learn about the world should be superseding the rights of parents to force their kid to be exactly like them. Kids do not belong to their parents. They belong to the community. And you are just creating dysfunction for them if you deny them educational opportunities. The school's librarian points out that, this is not about forcing a book into students' hands. It's about the freedom to read, about providing voluntary access to a well-written, highly acclaimed resource in a safe place for a teenager who might want or need it. Again, it's not about necessarily, this book is not part of the curriculum. It's just a resource for kids who might need it. Apparently, some of the high school students did a demonstration, but I don't want to post their picture. Yeah, so it could be that this gets escalated and they have to actually read the book and decide legally whether this is obscene or not. It's hard to prove something is obscene with the First Amendment being written the way that it is. So it sort of depends. Like, we're not sure what's going to happen next about this. Like, the main problem is that it's not okay for cops to just show up at schools and suddenly start searching a classroom for an allegedly banned book. Like, There are so many other things that I think should happen aside from that. I don't think that that should ever be on the table. Modern culture tries to shelter children much more than they did in the 1970s and 80s. Strange that the same people who grew up without restrictions are crazy about restricting not only their own children, but everyone else. Listen, poor people used to all like share a one-room house. Maybe the kids would be sleeping in the loft or something, but like you just might hear your parents having sex sometimes. Of course, if you're rich and you can afford a separate room or what have you, you know, fine. Even if you are relatively rich, if you are like just rich enough to have a tiny castle, but not quite rich enough to have a castle with more than one room, like there are structures like that where it's like, okay, this person is obviously of some petty importance. They live in like a stone structure with a kind of like defensive wall, but it's basically only one room. And maybe you would be fancy and have like a wooden box built around your bed where you enter the wooden box and the doors kind of slide shut for a little bit of privacy. But yeah, so for throughout a lot of human history, it's just been like, yeah, sex is going to happen and you all like stay in the same room with each other. So how the fuck are you going to prevent kids from knowing about it? But then again, you know, just because something has been happening for a long time doesn't make it a good thing necessarily. I'm sure that kids were also being made to do a lot of labor in that time. And that's not something I'm going to say was a good thing just because we were doing it. Yeah, but I'm saying the book wasn't in a school where little kids could read it. It was in a middle school, allegedly. This is the same reason cops will take drug-sniffing dogs into schools instead of providing adequate education on recreational drugs. It's about intimidation. Conservatives don't know any way to get what they want without fear and force. It's so much easier to incentivize behavior with a carrot than with a stick. Like, people don't understand this. Like, the stick technically works, it's just not a very effective tool. And I will add also, before we move on from the end of this segment, this person says over on Twitter, oh my God, no. The joke is that the fascism is already being implemented in 1,000 small ways like this. Police raiding schools for banned books is pretty on the nose in a blue state, under a blue president, and I believe a blue governor. There's no movie script takeover moment, just a very slow creep over time. Yeah, like I don't want to harp on it right at the end of this segment because I feel like we've talked about it plenty recently, but like the fascism that y'all are so concerned about under Trump is being constructed under Biden. And I'm not saying that that means that, you know, we should not vote for Biden or whatever, but it does mean that we need to vote for Biden and then actively work against him in every possible way if he gets elected. You know, like, honestly, I wish that there was any other option than voting for him, but it is true that the fascism happens slower under a Democratic president, but there are still horrendous, disgusting, destructive, fascist things happening under our allegedly democratic government. In blue states, you know, an individual police officer deciding that he was going to go intimidate probably someone who he assumed to be a queer teacher based on the fact that they have the book. Like, who told you to do that, sir? Did some boss man actually tell him to do it, or did this guy just decide to do that? But yeah, the election is going to be a fun time, and I think we need to be considering what our options are under the assumption that whether it be this election or the next election, a Republican is going to win again, and they will try to dismantle the democracy. Like, you can try to hold it off this election, the next election, but we're there, and even if we weren't there, there is still the impending climate collapse that the Democrats are not doing anything about. So maybe shift your focus onto, like, what can you do locally to make sure that you people in your community are taken care of? Establish, like, mutual aid, provide food for people, you know, talk about how you can allocate resources within the community, go to local politicians maybe and see if you can work with them, focus on creating sustainable local resources like community gardens and improving water catchment systems in your area. Like, because you know, all the voting in the world is not going to stop the climate collapse at this point, I don't think. So let's just refocus on this. I keep hoping for a different Dem candidate, but I'm resigned. I know, it's so sad. I really think that they should reconsider running him, but they're not going to. They're just going to keep being stupid. So whatever. Yeah, talk to your neighbors and build mutual aid. I wonder if there's a community garden near me. I wonder if I could just do, like, even though I'm not going to be staying in this part of the country for very long, I could do one growing season in a community garden. I don't know, that could be fun. Hi, thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Sojo, Sarah A., Athiet, Kevin Young, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, Mr. Atheist, and Ella V. Nobody.